Hey guys, so topic for video today is, do we need to train to muscle failure? Now, I've explained this a couple times in the live streams, and I actually just got off the phone with a coaching client and explained to him, why it's beneficial to train to failure and why you should. Do we need to train to muscle failure to see results? Well, the answer is no, especially in the beginning. But training to muscle failure will ensure that you are getting the optimal stimulus and you will receive optimal results. So clarification, do you need to train to muscle failure to see results? No, but you should. The research points to that it is far more effective in terms of getting optimal or maximal results training to muscle failure. And here's why. So, exercise in a nutshell is simply an adaptation or response to a stress. The stress being muscle inroad, or more easily defined as fatigue. The muscle inroad or fatigue produces a ton of stress: mechanical stress, metabolic stress, stress on bone and connective tissue, you name it. Then the muscle grows stronger, thicker, improves metabolism, cardiovascular function, the other supporting tissues that support the muscle, such as bone and connective tissue, in order to allow the muscle to handle the stress better. So the key word is stress. If you are providing adequate stress on your muscle, it will adapt and respond to that stress in order to better handle the stress. I say you don't need to train to muscle failure in the beginning because your body is not accustomed to any stress at all. So it'll take very little stress to stimulate an adaptation. But as time goes on, your resilience to the stress is going to improve because your muscular strength, size, and all the other factors of functional ability are improving to be more resilient to that stress. So, especially down the road, training to muscle failure is going to be a huge component of maximizing your response to training. The best example I can give about this is, I love the suntan analogy. It's perfect. It's a stress and an adaptive response to the threat in the environment, which is the UV light. So think about, I used to live in New York, and now I live down in Florida, which is a very hot, sunny climate. We would often come to Florida for vacation, often in February or March, after spending pretty much half of October, November, December, January, 3, 4, 5 months in cloudy, gloomy weather with very little sun exposure. As soon as we got to Florida and got some exposure to the sun, our skin would be irritated and burned like that, because we were not used to the stress of the sun. Therefore, it took very little ultraviolet light or stress on the skin in order to set in motion the adaptive process of a suntan. So take an individual who's been in the house for months in the winter, throw them in Florida, they're going to be able to tolerate very little ultraviolet light, very little sunlight, and they're going to adapt and get a tan pretty quickly with very little exposure, very little stress. Over time, this individual's skin is going to adapt, and it's going to take more sunlight, more stress in order to adapt with a suntan. Now, living in Florida, I can be outside without sunscreen for hours and hours and hours. It will not burn. Same thing is similar with exercise. Take an individual who has never trained before, a very deconditioned individual, an elderly individual. It takes very little muscular stress in order to set in motion the adaptive response. Meaning they don't need to train to failure. They barely need to do anything in the beginning. This then, as time goes on, the stress is going to need to increase to a certain amount in order to keep stimulating the body to improve. The reason we use muscle failure is because we don't know the exact amount of stress required per individual to set in motion the adaptive response. For instance, one individual may need to fatigue 60% of the available muscle tissue. Another individual may need to fatigue 80%. A third individual may need to fatigue 90 to 95% of their available muscle tissue in order to set in motion an adaptive response. Some people may need as little as 20 or 30 or 40%. These are arbitrary numbers, not real numbers, just an example. We don't know how much fatigue precisely is required to set in motion the adaptive response. So what do? We fatigue the muscle completely so that way we hit whichever threshold or amount of fatigue is required to set in motion the response. Maybe it's 60% of available strength needs to be diminished before setting in motion the response. So if we go to 100% fatigue and diminish 100% of the available strength or momentary ability by training to failure, we've hit that 60%. Maybe it's 80. If we go to 100, we hit 80. Maybe it's 40. If we go to 100, we hit 40. So the purpose of training to momentary muscle failure is to hit that fatigue threshold, that stimulatory threshold, because we don't know exactly where it is. I drew a chart for the live stream, and I'm going to draw the chart again. Fatigue, time, stimulus, fail. So, take a look at this chart. Simple chart. This is you when your muscles are fresh. This is the amount of fatigue your muscles encounter over time. This is muscle failure. So over the duration of a set, you're eventually going to get to the point your muscles are completely fatigued. Let's say, for instance, this is the amount of fatigue or the threshold which a stimulation occurs. It could occur here. It could occur here. It could occur here. Here. Anywhere along this line. We don't know where this stimulation threshold occurs. So by going all the way to failure, we can be sure that we generated enough fatigue to hit the stimulation threshold. Say, for instance, we knew exactly it was 50% of momentary ability. And technically, we'd only have to go here. But we don't know. So that is why we completely fatigue the muscle, so we can be sure that we hit the threshold of muscle stimulation. This is why some people see results without training to failure, because their threshold may be very high. They may need very little muscle fatigue in order to see results. So by not training to failure and doing their crappy workouts, they see results. But most individuals are not going to be that sensitive. So we train to muscle failure to make sure we hit the stimulus. Muscle failure is an indication that you have completely fatigued the muscle. It is also an indication that, or a signal to your body that something in the environment is placing a demand on your body that it cannot handle. And your body interprets this as a need to adapt to survive. So training to muscle failure is the most powerful stimulus. Although it's not necessary, it is certainly the most powerful. And also, training to muscle failure is going to make your workouts more time efficient. Because you know when you've reached muscle failure, you have provided adequate stimulus. When you train to muscle failure and produce that high level of stress, you simply can't tolerate very long. So, in a nutshell, although training to muscle failure may not be completely necessary for some people, it would behoove you to always train to muscle failure to know that you are getting the optimal stimulus for your body, because we really don't know what level of muscle fatigue is required based on the individual. Also, training to muscle failure is not dangerous. There are some idiots out there that say stupid things like, well, if you train to muscle failure, you're not going to be able to train as often. Well, no shit. And that is under the assumption that a higher frequency results in better results, when all the research shows that that's not true. The research shows that the higher the stress, the better the results. But the higher the stress, the lower the volume tolerance, the lower the frequency tolerance. So training to muscle failure is not dangerous. Anyone who says that is an idiot, and never take advice from them. If you have any other questions about training to muscle failure or what I just showed you here, drop them in the comments below, and I will do a follow-up video.